My husband threw me down a flight of stairs after beating me for 3 straight hours. When I finally opened my eyes in the hospital 2 days later, the first thing I saw was a ceiling I didn't recognize. My body felt like it had been torn apart and sewn back together by strangers. 6 broken ribs, a partially collapsed lung, my face so swollen I couldn't even blink properly. And when the nurse quietly leaned in to tell me what happened, she whispered that he'd disappeared, left town, and not alone, he ran off with our neighbor, the one who used to smile at me through the fence while she watered her roses. That moment laying in that hospital bed with IV lines in both arms and betrayal clawing at my chest, I understood that no one was going to rescue me. If I wanted to live, I would have to do it myself. My name is Nettie Oliver. I'm 74 years old now, living quietly in Calistoga, California. People around here know me as the retired teacher who volunteers at the Adult Literacy Center and makes killer cornbread at the church potlucks. But they don't know the full story. Not the story behind the scars I carry inside, or the nights I wake up gasping from dreams I don't talk about. Not the story of how I survived a man who promised me love, but gave me nothing but pain. It took me decades to find the courage to speak it aloud, and even longer to share it with the world. But I believe there's someone out there, maybe more than one person, who needs to hear it. I was born in the spring of 1951 in a small wooden house nestled among the rolling hills just outside Calistoga. Back then, it was quiet wine country, long before the tourists came and the prices went sky high. My daddy, Harold Morgan, worked in the vineyards, hands stained deep from years of pruning vines and crushing grapes. He wasn't a man of many words, but he had a good soul and calloused hands that never once struck a living thing. My mama, Marlene, was a strong church woman who made the best cornbread west of the Mississippi. She baked for the town cafes and did laundry for the neighbors. Somehow, she always smelled like flour and lavender. We didn't have much. A leaky roof, 1 bathroom shared by 5 people, and a backyard barely big enough to grow tomatoes. But we had warmth, we had kindness, and we had each other. I shared a room with my 2 older sisters, Ruthie and Jean. We'd whisper secrets at night and trace stories on each other's backs with our fingers. The house was full of music hymns on Sundays, Elvis on weekdays, and the sound of Mama humming while she scrubbed the kitchen floor. I was a quiet child, observant, always watching how people treated one another. I think I learned about love not from fairy tales, but from the way my daddy looked at Mama when she wasn't paying attention. After a long day in the fields, he'd wrap his arms around her waist while she stirred the pot of beans on the stove. He'd kiss the back of her neck and ask if she needed anything. Love, he used to say, is shown in the way a man listens. Mama once told me, Nettie, when you find someone, don't look at his smile. Watch how he treats his mother. Watch how he talks to the waitress when his food's cold. I tucked that advice into my heart like a pressed flower between Bible pages. I thought I knew what to look for. I dreamed of becoming a teacher. My sisters rolled their eyes when I'd line up stones in the yard and pretend they were students. But I didn't care. I loved words, books, chalk on blackboards. The idea that you could take a mind that didn't know something and help it blossom into understanding, that felt like magic to me. With a scholarship and a lot of prayers, I was the first in my family to go to junior college. I commuted by bus to Santa Rosa and studied until my fingers cramped. In 1970, when I was just 19, I graduated from teacher training and got a job at a small school right there in the Napa Valley. I felt like I was standing at the edge of the life I'd always dreamed of. The children were everything to me: bright eyes, scraped knees, crooked teeth, endless questions. I taught second grade, and every little breakthrough a child learning to read, to write their name, to tie their shoe felt like a celebration. My classroom was decorated with paper butterflies and construction paper apples. I kept a candy jar on my desk and gave out peppermints for good behavior. And then one day, during lunch break, he walked into my classroom. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that arrived just a little too early. Said his name was Calvin Oliver. He was there to enroll his nephew, who had just moved into the area. He wore a pressed blue shirt and smelled faintly of cologne and old tobacco. I remember thinking he looked like a movie star from the black and white films Mama loved. He asked, "Are you the teacher here?" I nodded, suddenly shy. "You look too young to be shaping young minds," he said, with a grin that made my stomach flutter. It was the kind of attention I'd never known, kind, curious, almost reverent, and I fresh-faced, full of hope, and utterly naive fell for it like a bird flying straight into a window. I had no idea then that this charming man would one day become the reason I couldn't sleep through the night, that his words would become weapons, and his hands would leave bruises I'd spend years hiding. But that's the thing about pain, it never shows up dressed as itself. It arrives with a smile. It opens doors politely. It calls you beautiful before it ever calls you worthless. And by the time you realize what it truly is, it's already settled in your home and changed the locks. When Calvin first came into my life, I thought he was a gift from God. He kept showing up at the school, always with some excuse. He said his nephew forgot his lunch, then a jacket, then a permission slip. I'd catch him leaning against the fence when recess ended, chatting with the kids, always dressed neatly, always flashing that disarming smile. He'd tip his head slightly when he spoke, like he was letting you in on a secret. And I'll admit it, it made me feel special, seen. After a few weeks, he asked if he could take me for ice cream. I remember hesitating. I'd never been on a real date before. I told Mama, and she gave me that look, the one that held 100 unsaid warnings. "Be careful, Nettie," she said gently. Men who wear their charm like cologne often think it'll cover up something sour underneath. But I was 20 and foolish in the way only young women who've never been hurt can be. I went. We sat on a bench outside a small diner with paper cones in our hands, and he told me about his job as a furniture salesman, how he wanted to open his own business someday, maybe a little storefront with handcrafted tables and chairs. "I want to build something real," he said, eyes locked on mine, something sturdy, lasting, like a good marriage. I felt my cheeks warm. He was smooth, but not pushy, complimentary, but never crossing the line. That first night, he didn't even try to hold my hand. He made me feel like I was made of glass, and he didn't want to risk a single crack. The courtship was sweet, slow, proper. Calvin would stop by my parents' home on Sunday afternoons with wildflowers he claimed he'd picked on the roadside. He brought fresh peaches, helped Daddy fix the fence, and even washed dishes after supper. My mother warmed to him eventually, but my father stayed quiet, watching from behind his newspaper with a steady, unreadable look in his eyes. "Seems like a good man," Daddy finally said one night, his voice low as we sat outside under the porch light. "But Nettie, just remember some folks only show you the part of themselves they want you to see." I nodded, but I didn't really listen. For the first 6 months, Calvin was the man every woman dreams of. He left notes in my lunch bag, picked me up from work with a thermos of hot tea. He called me darlin' with a softness that made my heart melt. And when he kissed me, it wasn't hurried or greedy. It felt safe, intentional. When he proposed on Christmas Eve, surrounded by my sisters and parents, I cried. Mama hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. And Daddy shook Calvin's hand with a firmness that, looking back now, felt like a silent warning more than a welcome. We were married on a cool April morning in 1972 at the same white-steepled church where I'd been baptized. My dress was handmade by my Aunt Georgia, and my cousin stitched tiny pearls along the hem. I walked down the aisle on Daddy's arm, believing with every inch of my heart that I was walking toward forever. Our honeymoon was modest, a week in a little mountain town near Lake Tahoe. Calvin had saved up for months to make it happen. It was my first time seeing snow. We stayed in a tiny cabin with creaky floors and no TV, but I didn't care. I was in love. I was a wife. At first, everything felt like a dream. Calvin cooked breakfast some mornings. He rubbed my feet when I got home from teaching. We built a routine weeknight dinners at our small kitchen table. Radio playing in the background. Him asking about my students and pretending to understand the lesson plans I shared. But then something started to shift. It was subtle at first. A raised eyebrow when I laughed too long at something a male teacher said. A comment about how the skirt I wore might be a little too friendly. A question about why I needed to wear lipstick just to teach second graders. I brushed it off. I told myself he was just protective, that maybe this was what marriage was adjusting, compromising. When I got pregnant that fall, Calvin cried, real tears. He cradled my face in his hands and said he'd always dreamed of being a father. He talked about coaching Little League, taking our child fishing, teaching them how to drive. For a moment, the light in his eyes made me forget every odd thing that had been creeping in. But I lost that baby 3 months later. A quiet, sudden miscarriage that left me curled on the bathroom floor, bleeding and shivering. Calvin didn't say much on the drive home from the hospital. That night, he stood in the kitchen, staring at me like I was a disappointment wrapped in an apron. You should have been more careful, he muttered. The words landed like stones, heavy, cold. I didn't answer him. I just closed myself in the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and cried as quietly as I could into a towel. I told myself he was grieving in his own way. I told myself it was stress. But the man who used to kiss my knuckles had stopped looking me in the eyes, and deep inside, I began to sense something was wrong terribly, silently wrong. The months after the miscarriage were gray. Not just outside, though, that winter did seem unusually cold and wet, but inside my home, inside my body, inside my marriage. Calvin wasn't the same. I wasn't either. He came home later and later, offering half-hearted excuses about traffic or extra paperwork at the store. But the furniture shop closed at 6, and even a new bride learns quickly when something isn't adding up. I'd sit at the dinner table alone, staring at the cold pork chops, wondering if I was going crazy or just not enough. He started drinking. At first, it was just a beer after work, then 2, then hard liquor on an empty stomach before dinner, even hit the table. I'd come home from school and find the house dark. Calvin sprawled out in the recliner, snoring, the bottle still half full, or worse, half empty. Then came the sharpness. He'd criticized the way I cooked, the way I folded the laundry, the way I talked too much or didn't smile enough. One night, I wore a yellow blouse to church a blouse my mama had helped me sew, and he looked me up and down and said, "You're not 16 anymore. Nettie, that color doesn't suit you." I remember how I changed before we left into something gray, and how I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It mattered more than I let myself admit. There were still good days, or at least quiet ones. He'd kiss my forehead and apologize for being in a mood. He'd promise he was just tired, that work was stressful, that things would get better soon. And I believed him because I needed to, because I was scared of what it meant if I didn't. Then I got pregnant again. This time, I tiptoed through the months like I was walking on glass. I followed every doctor's order, ate the right foods, cut back my hours at school, even stopped going to church when Calvin said he didn't want people fussing over us. I was determined to do everything right. For a little while, Calvin softened again. He rubbed my back at night. He whispered into my belly, calling the baby little champ. He even bought a small crib from a second-hand store and sanded it down himself. But in the 5th month, I started bleeding. I'll never forget the silence in that hospital room. The doctor's eyes told me before his mouth did. Another miscarriage, another dream dissolved, another failure. At least, that's how Calvin saw it. He didn't wait until we got home this time. In the car, hands clenched on the steering wheel, he hissed, "What's wrong with you? You can't even hold a baby." I stared out the window, the trees along the highway smearing past like a watercolor painting in the rain. I didn't respond. I couldn't. We pulled into the driveway, and he slammed the door hard enough to shake the siding on the house. Inside, I sat down in the kitchen, feeling numb. I think I was still in shock. When he came back in, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, that hollow look in his eyes. And then I finally said something I don't even remember exactly what. I think I told him he wasn't helping, that he made everything worse, that I didn't feel safe anymore. And that's when he hit me. His hand cracked across my face so hard that my vision went white. I stumbled back, hit the kitchen counter, and felt something warm run from my nose. I tasted blood before I could even process what had happened. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," he growled, his jaw tight, fists still clenched. "I'm your husband. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there, stunned. Somewhere in my head, a voice told me to move, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. That night, while he slept in the living room, I locked myself in the bathroom and looked at my reflection for the first time since the hospital. My left cheek was swollen and already purpling. My lip was split. My eye looked haunted, like it belonged to someone else. I thought about calling Daddy, about showing up at my parents' house with nothing but my purse and my wounds. But shame settled in deeper than the bruises. What would they think? That I couldn't keep a marriage, that I wasn't woman enough to give them a grandchild or keep a man happy. So I stayed. I swallowed my pain, painted on a smile for work, and made excuses for the marks. Tripped on the stairs, slipped in the tub, got hit with a cabinet door. People nodded, eyes lowered. Maybe they believed me, maybe they didn't, but no one asked twice. And once the lie is out there, it becomes a shield, one you learn to carry every day. Then, one summer evening, just past our 3rd anniversary, everything shattered. Calvin had lost his job at the furniture store. There were whispers about money missing from the cash register. Though he swore he'd done nothing wrong, he came home drunk more often. The house filled with the smell of whiskey and anger. And then there was her, Tracy Whitmore, our neighbor, 5 years older than me, divorced, always dressed up even when she was just watering her petunias. She started bringing over cookies, chatting with me at the fence, complimenting my flower beds. "If you ever need help, honey, I'm just next door." I didn't see it at first. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe it was easier to think anyone still saw something good in Calvin. But then I found a matchbook from a bar across town in his jacket pocket. I smelled perfume on his shirt that didn't belong to me. And the look in his eyes when I asked, it told me everything I didn't want to know. He didn't even bother lying well. "Stop being paranoid," he muttered. "I bumped into someone. That's all. I started sleeping with one eye open, and I began to wonder, if this was love, what was I holding on to? It was the 15th of May, 1975, a Friday. I remember the date because everything changed that day. The sky was heavy with rain, the kind that makes the whole town smell like wet dirt and old wood. School let out, early water was dripping through the classroom ceiling, and I walked home faster than usual, eager to get out of the storm and maybe finally talk to Calvin. We hadn't said more than a few words to each other in days, and something inside me told me that whatever we were pretending to be, it was running out of time. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, expecting silence, maybe the sound of the radio or the television humming low. But instead, I heard laughter, a woman's laughter, coming from the back of the house, our bedroom. The world stopped. I stood frozen in the doorway, wet from the rain, my school bag slipping from my shoulder. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it over the fence. I'd heard it offer me banana bread and call me sweetheart. It was Tracy. I didn't want to see it, but I did. I pushed the bedroom door open just enough to look in, and there they were, my husband, my neighbor, our bed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just shut the door and walked away. I went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared out the window. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually, I heard the back door creak open and shut. She was sneaking out, probably didn't want to be seen. Then his footsteps, whistling, like he'd just washed his car or taken a stroll through the park. When he saw me at the kitchen table, he paused mid-step. His smile froze. "What are you doing home?" he asked. "They sent us home early," I said calmly. "Rain, leaks in the ceiling." He looked at the clock on the wall, then back at me. I watched the moment realization hit his face like a slap. "Did you see something?" "I saw everything," I replied. I expected shouting. I expected excuses or some dramatic lie. I even expected denial. But what I didn't expect was for him to laugh. A full, careless, bitter laugh. "And what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Tell your mama run off to your daddy." I stood up slowly, heart pounding. "I'm leaving. Calvin. It's over." That's when it changed. His eyes went from mocking to something darker. They narrowed, and his body stiffened like a dog just before it lunges. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I'm not your property." I answered, "You can't stop me. You're my wife. You don't leave unless I say you can." I tried to walk past him. He stepped in front of me. I turned to go around him. He shoved me back into the chair so hard it scraped across the linoleum. "You're not leaving," he hissed. "This house is mine. You are mine. The house is rented," I said quietly, trembling, "and I belong to no one." I stood up again, ready to move fast, but I didn't get the chance. He hit me, a slap that burned so hard it knocked me sideways. My vision blurred, and I tasted blood before I even hit the floor. "Spying on me now," he shouted. Who gave you the right another slap? Then a punch to my stomach. I doubled over, unable to breathe, and collapsed to my knees. Tears blurred my eyes, but they didn't fall. Not yet. He grabbed me by the hair, yanked me toward the counter, and threw me into it like I was a rag doll. My head hit something, maybe the cabinet door, maybe the wall. I saw stars. You want to know why I was with Tracy? He yelled. Because she's a woman, not some frigid little schoolgirl who cries every time something gets hard. He kicked me. I don't remember where my ribs, my back, maybe both. I only remember the pain, like my body was breaking open from the inside. And still, he didn't stop. I should have known you'd be useless, he muttered. Can't even carry a child. Can't cook. Can't satisfy your husband. I curled up as tightly as I could, arms around my face, trying to protect what was left of me. Eventually, he stopped. I heard him breathing hard, like he'd just run a mile. Then, a long silence. I stayed still. I didn't want to give him a reason to start again. If you try to leave again, he said, standing over me, I'll kill you. You hear me? I didn't speak. I couldn't. He kicked me once more, my ribs again, I think, and then he was gone. Just like that. Grabbed his wallet, his keys, and walked out the door like he was heading to the grocery store. I want dinner ready when I get back, he called over his shoulder. And clean yourself up. You look disgusting. I laid there for I don't know how long. The house felt too quiet. Every breath hurt. My left eye was nearly swollen shut. Blood dripped from my nose and into my mouth. My fingers shook so badly I couldn't even reach for the table. But something inside me, something small, something stubborn refused to die. I dragged myself across the floor to the living room phone. My hand slipped on the receiver twice. I thought about calling Daddy, but I knew what he'd do. He'd come with his shotgun and never live another free day. I thought about calling the police, but in 1975 they didn't get involved in domestic affairs, especially not in small towns like ours. So I called the only person I trusted, my sister, Darlene. I sobbed into the phone. He beat me. Bad. I need help. Oh my God. Nettie, stay put. I'm coming. I'm coming right now. 15 minutes later, Darlene burst through the front door with her husband, Earl, right behind her. When they saw me on the floor, bloodied and shaking, they both froze. We're going to the hospital, Earl said, lifting me in his arms like I was a child. I whimpered from the pain. No, not the hospital. He'll find me there. Then to our house. Now, Darlene said firmly. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you out of here. They carried me away from the house I once believed would hold my dreams. I left behind broken glass, bloodstains on the tile, and a part of myself I'd never get back. But I also left with something else, a flicker of survival. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the beginning of my second life. Earl carried me like I weighed nothing, though every bump in the road felt like a lightning bolt through my ribs. I kept my face buried in his shirt to hide the mess Calvin had made of me, and because I couldn't bear to see the world looking normal when everything inside me was broken. Darlene's house was small, modest, and always smelled faintly of lemon and clean laundry. That night, it became a sanctuary. She helped me out of my torn blouse, wincing when she saw the bruises. Oh, Nettie. She whispered. I couldn't even meet her eyes. She brought me clean clothes and a cup of warm broth. I tried to hold the spoon myself but couldn't keep it steady. She fed me like a child. How long has this been going on? She finally asked. I was quiet for a long time. Then the words tumbled out of me. The first slap, the second miscarriage, The endless insults, the jealousy, Tracy, all of it, Darlene cried while I talked. Earl stood by the doorway, arms crossed tight, his face red with fury. If I see him again, I swear you won't. I cut in. I'm never going back. The next morning, I could barely move. My left eye was completely shut. My ribs ached with every breath, and my face was mottled with black and blue. Darlene wrapped me in a scarf and sunglasses before we went to the police station. I leaned on her the whole way, like an old woman, even though I was just 24. The officer at the front desk looked up with tired eyes. He asked a few basic questions, then blinked when I said my husband had beaten me. "You want to press charges?" he asked, like it was a decision I might regret. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "He tried to kill me." "You'll need to get a medical report," he added. "And you understand he could be arrested, right?" "Yes," I repeated, louder this time. "That's the point." We went straight to the clinic. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, examined me without saying much. When he finished writing up the report, 6 broken ribs, facial trauma, bruising, possible internal bleeding, he looked at me gently and said, "Miss Oliver, if you go back to him, he'll finish the job next time. I'm not going back." I whispered, "Not ever." I stayed with Darlene and Earl for 2 weeks. They let me sleep in their guest room, and their 2 little girls, Abby and Maureen, tiptoed around me like I was made of porcelain. Darlene made soup and peeled oranges for me every night. Earl offered to drive me anywhere I needed. No questions, no judgment. The strangest part, Calvin vanished. He never came to the hospital, never called, never showed up at Darlene's. 3 days after I filed the police report, the officer called to say he'd cleared out, took his clothes, his paycheck, his car. Even Tracy was gone. Just gone. No one had seen either of them since the day I walked in on them. At first, I felt terrified. What if he was planning something? What if he came back with a gun? But that fear eventually gave way to something else, relief. He'd left, and good riddance. Then, one afternoon, Darlene got a knock on the door. A man stood there holding a clipboard and a sad, worried expression. He introduced himself as the manager of the hardware store where Calvin had recently worked. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "but we've been trying to get in touch with Nettie Oliver. Calvin left without picking up his last paycheck. And, well, he took some things from the store." "What kind of things?" Darlene asked. "Construction materials, cement, lime, a shovel, a few tools. Said he was working on a project at his new place." Darlene stiffened beside me. "Did he say where?" I asked, my voice quiet. The man scratched his head. Said he and his girlfriend bought a small property just outside of town. Something rural. Never gave me the address. That night, I couldn't sleep. Cement, lime, tools, blood on the sheets in the bedroom, blood that hadn't come from me. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, one I couldn't shake. A few days later, the police came knocking. They'd found a body. It was Tracy, buried in a shallow grave on a small property out by the river, wrapped in a tarp, covered with a thin layer of quicklime. She'd been beaten to death much like I had been, but without the luck of surviving. Calvin had tried to cover it up. He'd even laid cement over the grave. Sloppy work, though. A neighbor had reported the smell, and a few buzzards had started circling, and Calvin dead. He'd tried to flee when police arrived, pulled a knife on an officer, and was shot down right there in the woods. The news hit like a brick. I felt everything at once: terror, rage, guilt, relief, and an awful, heavy sorrow. Not for him, not really, but for the girl. I used to be the one who believed his smile meant safety, the one who thought love was something you earned by suffering. The headlines were brutal. Local teacher's husband kills mistress, dies in shootout. They printed my wedding photo next to an image of Tracy's body being carried out on a stretcher. My name was everywhere, my story torn from me, twisted, judged by people who didn't know me at all. Parents pulled their kids from my class. The school principal called me into his office, red-faced and stammering. "Nettie, I don't want to do this. But the board, there's too much pressure." I was let go. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my name was now linked to murder and scandal. The victim, the widow, the one who survived. I sank into a depression so deep, I couldn't tell if the sun was rising or setting outside the window. I stopped brushing my hair, stopped eating, just laid in bed with the curtains closed and my heart hollow. "You have to fight," Darlene said, sitting beside me one day. "You didn't survive all that just to disappear. I don't know who I am anymore." I told her. "Yes, you do," she whispered. "You're Nettie, you're my sister, and you're still breathing." It was Daddy who pulled me up the rest of the way. He showed up one morning with 2 bus tickets and a suitcase. "Where are we going?" I asked, voice cracked from sleep. "Calistoga," he said, "far away from here. Far enough that you can start over. Mama, she'll stay with Darlene until we get settled, but we're going. Nettie, no arguments." So I went. On October 10th, 1975, I stepped off a Greyhound bus into the golden light of a new town. I was 24 years old, a widow, a survivor, a woman who'd walked through fire and still had ashes clinging to her sleeves. But I had breath in my lungs, and somewhere, beneath all the pain, I still had a heartbeat. Calistoga welcomed me with a breeze that smelled like grapes and warm soil. The sun hung low in the sky as we arrived, casting a golden hue over the vineyards that lined the road. Daddy didn't say much during the drive from the bus station, but his hand rested on my shoulder the whole way. That small, steady touch, like an anchor, meant everything. We moved into a small rental on the edge of town, 2 bedrooms, a crooked porch swing, a kitchen with faded linoleum floors and humming old appliances. To most people, it wouldn't look like much, but to me, it was freedom. It was peace. I spent the first few weeks doing nothing but walking. I walked along the vineyard paths in the early morning fog, down the main street where the shopkeepers greeted me like I was just another tourist. Nobody knew my name. Nobody looked at me with pity or suspicion. I felt invisible in the best possible way. Daddy found work as a mechanic's assistant in a garage run by a kind old man named Joe, who reminded me of the uncles from my childhood, soft-spoken, always chewing something, always willing to lend a hand. He offered me a part-time bookkeeping job, just to get me started. I took it, even though numbers had never been my thing. I needed something to fill my days, to help me remember I was alive. I showed up every morning at 8, kept the books tidy, answered phones, made coffee, and listened to the radio in the background while I scribbled in ledgers. Joe never asked about my past, but one day, after I flinched when someone knocked a wrench off a workbench, he said, "You don't owe anyone your story, Nettie, but don't ever let what happened to you become your whole story either." That stuck with me. Evenings were quiet. I'd cook dinner for Daddy, simple meals like roast chicken, baked potatoes, or collard greens the way Mama used to make them. We'd eat on the porch in silence, watching the sunset dip behind the hills. Sometimes he'd hum a hymn under his breath. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and pretend I was a little girl again, safe and untouched by the world. Eventually, Daddy encouraged me to start volunteering at the local elementary school. You don't have to go back to teaching full-time, he said, but maybe just read to the kids. Help in the library. You've got too much heart to keep it all locked away. It took me weeks to build the courage, but I did it. The school librarian, Mrs. Wallace, was a cheerful woman in her 60s with big glasses and an even bigger heart. When I told her I used to teach second grade, she lit up. "Oh, honey, come help us with reading time. These little ones will love you." And they did. There was something about sitting on a colorful rug, holding a picture book in my hands, and seeing tiny eyes light up at each turn of the page that began to sew something back together inside me. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to hide. I just had to show up, be present, and give what I had left. One afternoon, a little boy named Lucas, maybe 6 or 7, tugged on my sleeve after story time. "Miss Nettie," he said softly, "you have a kind voice, like my grandma." I smiled. It was the first time in months I'd smiled without it hurting. That night, I stayed up and wrote in my old notebook, just a few words at first, then a paragraph, then 2. I didn't know what I was writing, but it felt good to see something come from me that wasn't grief or pain. By winter, I was volunteering 3 days a week and helping with the school's Christmas program. I even baked ginger cookies with the kids, which earned me the affectionate nickname Miss Nettie, with the good treats. I hadn't felt needed like that in years. That same winter, Mama finally moved out to join us. She brought her old quilting frame, her sewing kit, and jars of homemade jam. She never asked for details, just hugged me tight when she arrived, rested her cheek against my hair, and said, "My baby's still standing." That's all I need to know. The 3 of us made a quiet little household. On Saturdays, we'd visit the farmer's market or sit on the porch while Mama quilted and Daddy dozed. Life was no longer about surviving. It was about healing. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Wallace approached me with a question. "Nettie," she said, adjusting her glasses, "have you ever thought about starting a little reading group for women? You've got such a calming way about you, and I think there are ladies in this town who could use a safe space." "A safe space?" I asked, a little surprised. She nodded. "To share, to learn, maybe even to heal. You're not the only one carrying pain around here." That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea kept stirring in my chest like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I'd never seen myself as a leader, but I had survived something awful. And maybe that meant I had something to offer, so I said yes. And just like that, a new chapter of my life quietly began. We started small. Just 4 of us gathered in the back room of the Calistoga Library on a Wednesday evening, folding chairs, a plate of lemon cookies, a tin of weak coffee. Mrs. Wallace was there, of course. So was Ruthie, a widowed nurse who'd moved into town after her husband's heart attack. Then there was Susan, a young mother with sad eyes and a bruise she didn't try to hide. And me. I called it the Willow Circle. Not a club, not a therapy session, just a space where women could talk, listen, cry if they needed, a place where no one asked too many questions and no one judged. I told my story first, not all of it, just enough to let them know I'd lived through fire and come out the other side. My voice trembled at times, but I didn't stop. When I was done, Susan reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. That was the first time someone talked like they weren't ashamed. That night, I cried when I got home, but it wasn't the kind of crying that comes from pain. It was the kind that cleans you out, like your soul finally took a breath after holding it in for too long. Week by week, the circle grew. 10 women, then 15. We moved into the community center when the library couldn't hold us anymore. Some brought friends. Some came alone. Some just sat in silence the whole hour and left without a word. But they came, and they kept coming. I didn't try to fix anyone. That wasn't the point. I just offered a space where they could sit with their stories and feel seen. I brought in guest speakers, nurses, social workers, even a retired therapist who offered advice in gentle, grandmotherly tones. One day, a woman named Clara stood up and said, "I haven't slept without a light on in 15 years, but last night I turned it off just for 10 minutes." That may not sound like much, but for me, it was everything. We clapped, we smiled, we understood. Word spread fast in our little town. People began donating books, blankets, food, even art supplies. A local carpenter built us a bookshelf. One of the vineyard owners offered a quiet field for weekend retreats. It was like the town wrapped its arms around us and said, "You're safe here." I started writing again, more seriously this time. Short pieces, reflections, essays about trauma and strength. I never planned to share them publicly, but one day I read one aloud at the circle. It was about the day I left Calvin, about what it felt like to walk away from someone who promised to love you but only ever tried to break you. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Ruthie said, "You have to publish that." I laughed it off, but the seed was planted. With help from Mrs. Wallace and her nephew, who just so happened to be a small-town publisher, I put together a little collection titled Ashes and Roots, A Survivor's Reflections. It didn't make me famous, but it made people talk. Churches hosted readings. Bookstores asked for copies. I got letters from women across the state, thanking me for telling the truth when no one else around them would. By the time I turned 50, the Willow Circle had become more than a support group. It had become a movement. Women from Napa, Santa Rosa, even as far as Sacramento, came to Calistoga to sit in that warm room and share the things they'd been told to hide. I started mentoring younger women, teaching them how to run their own groups in their towns. We called ourselves branches, and each one reached out a little farther. One night, after a meeting, Susan, now remarried and running her own circle in Santa Rosa, gave me a hug and whispered, "You saved me, Nettie." But the truth was, they saved me too. For years, I thought I had nothing left. Calvin had stripped me bare, left me with scars on my skin and deeper ones inside. But these women, these nights of honesty and healing, they gave me my voice back. They reminded me that even after everything I'd endured, I still had something to give. And so I gave, not because I wanted recognition, but because I never wanted another girl, another woman, another broken heart to feel like they were alone in the dark. The Willow Circle had become the most sacred part of my life, and I'd do it all over again, just to feel that light, that warmth, that purpose. It was a spring afternoon, the air soft and perfumed with jasmine. When the letter came, I nearly tossed it aside with the grocery flyers, but something about the thick, cream-colored envelope and the embossed seal caught my eye. It was from the California Women's Foundation. I opened it at the kitchen table, expecting a donation request or an event flyer. But instead, I read, "Dear Ms. Oliver, We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive the 2005 Beacon of Strength Award for your exceptional service to women in need across rural communities. Your work founding the Willow Circle has inspired dozens of support chapters throughout the state and changed countless lives. We would be honored if you would join us in Sacramento for the award ceremony next month. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. It felt surreal. Me, an award. When I showed it to Mama, she touched the paper gently, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You've turned your pain into something holy," she whispered. Daddy clapped me on the back and said, "Told you your voice was too strong to stay quiet." The ceremony was beautiful. A sea of powerful women filled the room. Judges, teachers, nurses, artists, mothers, all of them survivors in one way or another. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage with my heart pounding, holding a speech I'd written the night before, but hadn't had the courage to read out loud to anyone. I stood at the podium and looked out over the crowd. "My name is Nettie Oliver," I began, "and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. I'm also a daughter, a teacher, a writer, and a woman who believes that healing is not a destination. It's a journey we take together." The room was silent, holding every word. I started the Willow Circle because I didn't want to feel alone anymore. But I stayed because I saw what happens when women come together and refuse to let pain be the end of their story. I left the stage to a standing ovation. That night, back in my hotel room, I thought about how far I'd come from a bruised girl on a bus to a woman standing in front of hundreds with her head held high. But something still tugged at me. A quiet voice. A memory I hadn't revisited in years. Louisville. I hadn't returned since the day Daddy put me on that bus. I told myself I didn't need to go back, that the past belonged to the past. But after that night in Sacramento, something inside me said it was time. So I bought a plane ticket. When I landed, the air felt heavier than I remembered, thick with old ghosts and unfinished chapters. The city had changed, of course. New buildings, new faces. But some things looked just the same. I took a cab to the old neighborhood. The house I once shared with Calvin was gone, torn down, a vacant lot now, overgrown with weeds and scattered debris. I stood at the chain-link fence for a long time, my hands gripping the cold metal, remembering the screams, the fear, the blood, and then I let go. I visited Darlene next. She opened the door and screamed when she saw me. "Nettie," she cried, hugging me so hard I thought I'd lose my breath. "Lord, have mercy. Look at you." Her girls were grown now. Abby was a nurse. Maureen taught music. Darlene herself had more silver in her hair, but the same warm smile. We sat for hours, catching up on everything my parents, the circle, Sacramento. She told me how proud she was, how none of it surprised her, because she'd always known I was meant for more than misery. Before I left, she took my hand. "You coming back here," she said softly. "That means you finally forgave the girl you used to be." And she was right. I wasn't just visiting a place. I was closing a loop. I had carried shame like a second skin for too many years. Shame for staying. Shame for loving the wrong man. Shame for surviving. But as I stood on that street in Louisville, I felt something break free. I didn't hate that girl anymore. I loved her for enduring, and I promised myself I'd never let her voice go unheard again. The morning I returned to Calistoga, a light rain was falling, painting the hills in shades of silver and green. I stepped off the shuttle, suitcase in hand, and there was Daddy waiting, just like he always did, with his cap in one hand and a quiet, knowing smile on his face. "You got what you needed. "Didn't you?" he asked as we drove back home. I nodded. I think I left something behind, but not something I want back. He didn't ask for details. He never did. He just reached over, patted my hand, and said, "Good, back home." The Willow Circle was still going strong. While I was away, Ruthie and Susan had taken over. The women said it felt no different, just a little quieter, without my voice starting the meetings. That made me smile. But something else had started growing inside me, a need to give more, to leave something lasting. So I started writing again. Not just essays this time, but a book, a real one. It was part memoir, part guide. I called it Roots That Bloom. I poured everything into it, not just the story of my life, but the lessons, the tools, the hope I had gathered along the way. I wrote it for the women who couldn't speak, the girls still trapped, the elders who'd suffered in silence. Publishing it felt like standing naked in front of the world again, but this time I wasn't afraid. The launch was small, just a reading at the town library, but the turnout was overwhelming. Women I hadn't seen in years showed up, hugging me, crying. Even some of the local men came, standing in the back with bowed heads, listening. And after that, something extraordinary happened. A woman from a nearby college reached out, saying she wanted to build a curriculum around Roots That Bloom. She said it spoke to what so many young women and men needed to hear, that healing is possible, that strength doesn't always roar, that survival is a story worth telling. My circle became a hub, a little center for change in that quiet town. And somehow, without meaning to, I had become more than a survivor. I had become a symbol, not perfect, but present, not whole, but healing. That summer, we celebrated 10 years of the Willow Circle. There were speeches and photos and cake. We lit candles for the women we'd lost, and we danced for the ones still finding their way. And as I stood watching the women laughing, talking, holding each other close, I felt a calm I hadn't known since I was a girl. My life had not gone the way I thought it would. It had been broken, bruised, stolen in pieces, but it had also been rebuilt by love, by community, by choice, and most of all, by the woman I had finally allowed myself to become. The last time I stood beneath the willow tree behind our community center, it was late autumn. The breeze was crisp, the leaves golden and trembling, clinging to their branches like memories not quite ready to let go. I stood there alone for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The women had all gone home after our final gathering of the season. We'd read poetry, shared stories, and cried together tears of grief. Yes, but also of gratitude, a kind of holy ache that only healing can bring. As I looked up at those swaying limbs, I thought back to who I had been when I first stepped off that bus from Kentucky. A woman trembling from wounds the world couldn't see. A woman who had believed she was too broken to ever be whole again. And now I was 74 years old, with silver in my hair and light in my eyes. I had laughed again. I had taught again. I had loved, oh, how I had loved, not just others, but finally and fully myself. The willow tree had become a symbol for us all, not just of sadness, but of strength. It bends, yes, but it doesn't break. It weeps, but it still stands tall. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the letter from the State Assembly. They were funding a statewide network of willow circles, and they wanted to name the founding program after me, the Nettie Oliver Center for Women's Healing and Empowerment. I cried, not because I needed recognition, but because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that my story, my scars, my survival had become something larger than me. They had become a refuge, a legacy, and maybe, just maybe, a lighthouse for women still lost in the dark. I wrote one last entry in my notebook that night. The things that nearly broke you will one day become the reason someone else survives. Tell the truth. Love the girl you used to be, and never, ever stop reaching for the light. That's what I want to leave with you. If you're listening to my story, especially those of you with gray at your temples and years in your bones, I want you to hear this from someone who has lived through the storm. It's never too late to begin again, not when you've lost your home. Not when your heart's been shattered, not even when you think your voice no longer matters. You may be retired from a job, but you're not retired from purpose. You may have outlived some people you loved, but you haven't outlived your worth. You may carry old wounds, but healing is still yours to claim. The most powerful chapters in your life don't have to be the first ones. Sometimes, the most beautiful story begins in the third act after the fall, after the silence, after the sorrow. That's where I found my voice. That's where I found me. So please don't let the world or your age or your past tell you you're done. You're not. You are still here. You still matter. And you still have the power to turn your pain into purpose. If Nettie's story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe you've walked a road like hers, or maybe you've helped someone who has. Either way, your voice matters here. And if you believe in the strength of second chances, in the healing that comes from truth, kindness, and community, please subscribe to our channel. There are more stories to tell, more lives to uplift, and more hope to share, because no matter your age, your story isn't over. Not yet. Not ever.